Today on Stock Charts in Focus, we're touring you through our chart annotation tools in both SharpCharts and ACP, showing you some tips, some tricks, some ways to get more out of those all-important chart annotating resources. Now, of course, if you want to document your work, you want to draw those trend lines, those support and resistance lines, Fibonacci tools, find price targets, and keep your notes right there on the charts. Of course, you're going to do that using these annotation tools. So the show today is going to help you get more out of those tools. If you annotate your charts at all, this is definitely one you don't want to miss. So it's all new. It's all here. It's Stock Charts in Focus. All right, my friends, welcome to the show, Stock Charts in Focus. Of course, our product focus show here on the channel where we dig into the site, dive into the tools, show you around the resources, and help you get more value out of stock charts. That's our mission here every Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern time, up on that live channel. Also up on our YouTube channel after that and the on-demand platform at StockChartsTV.com. My name is Grayson Roze, Vice President of Operations here at StockCharts.com. Wonderful to be with you as always. We got a fun show lined up. We're talking about our chart annotation tools. Now, this really is one of the most important features on stock charts. A little bit hidden when you first load up any of those charting resources. You got to launch those annotation tools on stock charts. But once you do, you've got a ton of power at your fingertips. Now, as technicians, we all love to find trends, support, and resistance. We love to use tools like our Fibonacci retracements, and we love to even do things like keep little notes on our charts. If this breaks out, I'm buying, those kinds of things. The annotation tools in SharpCharts and in ACP let you do all of that. And there are a ton of ways to get more out of those tools. There's a lot more that kind of meets the eye, a lot more beneath the surface that you really need to know about. So on the show today, we're just going to kind of walk through those tools, show you some of the things that I personally like to use, some hotkeys, some different shortcuts, and ways to get more out of both annotation tools. So exciting stuff coming up here in just a couple of minutes. Now, before we do that, right at the beginning of the show, I want to share some really exciting news with you all. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to have another product release rolling out site-wide. We got new features coming to pretty much every corner of the site. New features, new tools, new data, lots of enhancements, lots going on with our next product release. That, in and of itself, is very, very exciting. And of course, we're going to cover all of it right here on this show, also in our Chart Watchers newsletter. And if you're following Stock Charts, you'll see banners up at the top to help make sure that you know all about all those new features. As we've done in the past, we're going to have release notes that help you explore all those different features, kind of see things in action, and navigate around the site to check everything out. What's a little bit different this time, though, is that we're also going to be releasing some technology previews, as we're calling them. So we have been working behind the scenes on some huge projects. When I say huge, I mean monumental changes coming to stock charts, especially for SharpCharts. We've got some amazing things happening that the team has been working on, not just for weeks, but really for months and months and months. And they are big enough that we're not quite done with them. We don't want to totally release them yet. But we just can't wait. We can't keep ourselves contained any longer. We got to show you guys what we're working on. So in the next couple of weeks, as we get that product launch going, we're also going to have some of these technology previews that you're actually going to be able to log in and play around with. It's going to be very, very cool. Again, we'll highlight them here on the show, but keep an eye out for these technology previews and that new release coming to stock charts very soon. Of course, if you follow this show every Friday, you will see it all. We're going to highlight it all right here, but very, very exciting things coming to stock charts in the next couple of weeks. So we'll keep you guys posted. In the meantime, let's jump over to stock charts, take a look at some of these chart annotation tools in SharpCharts and ACP. So we are starting here on the SharpCharts workbench. We're going to start here, then jump over to ACP. Of course, if you're familiar with SharpCharts, if you're familiar with the annotation tool built into this platform, you know that to get there, you scroll down right below your charts, and in that left corner, there's that Annotate button. Now, once you click Annotate here in SharpCharts, it kind of launches you into a mode. This is how you enter the annotation mode for your charts in SharpCharts. Now, things are nice and easy to access. You've got kind of your tool buttons across the side, and then you've got all your settings and controls and things like that across the top. The first thing that I want to highlight on this annotation tool here in SharpCharts is something that you might have seen but might have kind of glossed over. It's this question mark right down here at the bottom. So we get this a lot. We get people who jump into chart notes, jump into this annotation tool, they start drawing things, and they're kind of saying, is there anything more I can do with this? It's kind of clunky. I have to click all these buttons. How does this work? How can I kind of streamline this? Well, the answer is that there are actually a lot of global hotkeys and little shortcuts and things like that built right into the annotation tool. So when you give this question mark a click, that's going to open up this dialog in the middle of the screen. And as you can see, this has a lot of different notes for those kind of shortcuts and things like that. First off, gives you kind of a quick reference on what these different buttons and icons mean, the saving, the undo, delete, and how to get out of chart notes as well, get out of that annotation tool. But below that are the ones that really start to make the annotation tool fly. So as you are drawing around your charts, you can actually use the keyboard to control a lot of what you're trying to do. For instance, if you've got an annotation selected and you want to delete that off of your chart, you don't actually have to go hit the trash can button. All you have to do is hit delete right on the keyboard. If you want to save your annotations, you don't actually have to go over to the left and find that little icon. You can just use Command S to actually save your annotations. Now, this is going to be different depending on the machine that you're on. So if you're on a Windows machine versus an Apple machine, things are going to be a little bit different. I think on a Windows machine, it's Control instead of Command. I'm on an Apple laptop, so that's why mine says Command here. But you have all of these different hotkeys to play around with. So the ones that I use a ton, Command S to save my annotations on the fly, Command Z to undo something. That's a really helpful one if you draw a line and then you say, nope, actually I want to go back to what I had before. Don't forget about Command Z. I use Command D all the time to duplicate annotations, especially when I'm drawing trend lines or support and resistance lines. If I want to draw multiple annotations, that Command D is a big one. Those are some of the ones that I personally use a ton, but of course there are others in here. Now, in addition to those global hotkeys, you also have annotation specific tools that you can use. So if we scroll down here just a little bit, you can see that if you're using any of these specific annotations, trendline obviously being one of the biggest ones, one of the most popular ones, something that I use every single day, you do have some specific hotkeys for these different tools. The two that I want to draw your attention to, which we're actually going to demonstrate in just a second, trendline and Fibonacci retracements. So with that trend line annotation, of course, when you first draw a trend line, as you'll see, it's just kind of floating in any direction. You can draw that line anywhere that you want. Sometimes though, you want that trend line to either be perfectly horizontal so that you can use it more as a support and resistance line, or you might even want to mark a specific date and make it perfectly vertical. So if you hold down Command and you drag on one of the handles of that trend line, it'll actually snap to either perfectly vertical or perfectly horizontal. We'll demonstrate that in just a second, but I've done that on the show in the past when we've been showing off different annotations, and people always write in and say, holy heck, how did you do that? How did you get that trend line to be perfectly horizontal? So you'll see that one in just a second. Another one that we get a lot of questions about is Fibonacci retracements. How can I add additional fib levels to my annotation here in SharpCharts? Well, the way that you do that is by using some of these hotkeys in here. Command drag to toggle on those different lines. You can see that right on the handle. If you press Command drag right on the handle of a Fibonacci retracement, it'll actually add additional fib levels for you automatically. So wanted to draw your attention to this chart notes help. It is incredibly helpful. One of the things that is a little bit buried here in the annotation tool, but full of information, full of some power. So now that we've taken a look at that, let's actually see some of this stuff in action. Let's jump over to our trendline tool. That was the one that I wanted to show you. This is something I use all the time. We'll demonstrate a couple of these hotkeys now. So let's say we've got our trend line and we're sort of highlighting this downtrend here that Microsoft was printing for quite a while. You can see that as I drag this trend line around, right, it's just going to be sort of wherever I put it. Well, let's say I wanted to take this line and I wanted to use it, like I said, as a support and resistance line. That's something I do a ton on my charts. So I want this to be perfectly horizontal. Now, I can drag it up and make it kind of visually horizontal, but in my case, I like things to be absolutely spot on, 100% perfectly flat. So all I have to do as I'm dragging this around is hold down that command key, and you'll see as soon as I start to move, this line is now locked in. I can drag it back and forth, but I can't drag it up and down. When I do that, it's still locked in at a perfectly horizontal level. This is a huge, huge tool. We can also do this at the vertical level. So if it's closer to being a vertical line, this will actually auto detect that and snap to being perfectly vertical. We can put that right there. Let's say we wanted to mark this this sort of swing high here for Microsoft. We could do that with that vertical tool. So this is one that I use a ton, especially in my case. I used to use the auto support and resistance tool a lot more than I do now. What I use now is actually just trend lines locked horizontally. I find that that does a lot for me. So this is a very, very nice tool to be able to use. So let's say we wanted to drag this line down here to mark this sort of lower level resistance point for Microsoft. And then let's say we wanted to also mark that level right up at the 312. Well, again, using some of those hotkeys, we can make sure that that is selected. You can see that indicated by those little yellow handles on each end. And we can use that Command D key to actually duplicate that. So that quickly duplicated our line. We can now drag that up and mark our next resistance level on this chart. We can even drag these across panels. So if we wanted to actually use that to mark some resistance on the price relative line, you can see that we can do the exact same thing up here. We can grab something from down on the price panel and actually drag it right up to the top of this chart to another indicator panel on this chart. Now, once we're ready to actually save this, let's say we like these annotations that we've drawn here on Microsoft. Again, we don't have to worry about going over here and clicking that save button. All we have to do is hit Command S, and that's going to pop up that save dialog to quickly save that chart. Now, once this is saved, if we make a change, you can see that's going to load that, going to kick us out of chart notes really quick. But once we go back to that saved chart, if we drag any of these things around, let's say we just kind of move this line down a little bit, and then we resave that chart, because that chart's already been saved, it's going to be nice and quick for us here in SharpCharts. We don't actually have to deal with that save dialog popping up again on the screen. Once it's a save chart, it's just going to save it really, really quickly. So those are a couple of the little tricks that I like to use, especially with those hotkeys here in SharpCharts. Now, one other thing that I always like to draw people's attention to is the color picker, another key feature here in the SharpCharts annotation tool. So up here, you actually have a couple of different tools, whether you know it or not. We use kind of a most recently used thing here in SharpCharts. When you open up this color picker, you've got a lot of options for picking your colors. Now, the way that this is going to work, it's going to give you all of those defaults up at the top, but in that bottom row down at the bottom, this is actually going to start to fill in as you go with different colors that you have recently used. So this is a very, very handy little thing. If you like to use a couple of custom colors instead of those kind of standard ones out of the box, this is a really, really helpful thing to know about here in the color picker. Now, in my case, I like to actually mess with the opacity of my annotation. So you can see that what I've done is I've taken a purple annotation and I've dragged this slider up and down to actually make that thing a little bit more transparent. You can see that those purples are a little bit faded out. Instead of being those solid color blocks, they're a little bit more transparent. The reason that I like that is that when I put those annotations on my chart, it doesn't dominate the price bars. I can kind of see through things a little bit, but still have those trend lines, support and resistance lines, things like that. But you can actually mess with those opacity settings on any colors that you like to use. And again, those will get saved into this most recently used row down at the bottom of the color picker. Now, the other thing that's going to happen for you, you're going to have quick access to a couple of those recently used colors right here next to that color picker. There are 3 blocks, 3 spaces that are automatically going to update every time you use a new color. So this is actually a great way to flip between different colors. You can see if I click that second one, that purple line right here got a little bit darker. If I want to go back to that lighter purple that I was using a minute ago, I've got that quick access right there. So a couple of handy little things about that color picker, in addition, of course, to all the other settings that you have, line width, line style, different things like that. And depending on the tool that you're selecting down here, you're going to have different settings. But that color picker actually does a lot more than people realize. So I always like to draw people's attention to that. Now, of course, just kind of rounding out our tour here of the annotation tool in SharpCharts, you've got all of your different tools, the key things that you're going to be using in these different menus. You can open up any of those, things like our auto support and resistance tool, and that's going to be sort of selected in the menu. So you can draw one of these on that chart, move it up and down, move on to a different tool. And we've got all of these different kind of groups, sort of four categories of annotation tools. So here are some of our note tools, different things like percent change, actually another one that I use a lot. If you want to measure something, you can actually sort of drag that up and measure how far Microsoft has moved, for instance, off that 239 level. You can see that right in the middle of the screen. Again, if you want to delete anything, just use those keys. You don't have to worry about going and hitting buttons. You can just use those hotkeys. But you've got a couple of different groups in here to play with. Shape tools, and then of course some of your kind of mathematical trend tools or technical tools, things like Fibonacci retracements and all that good stuff. So that kind of rounds us out on our tour of the SharpCharts annotation tools. Hopefully that's helped you get a couple of new ideas, different ways to kind of streamline, optimize your annotation process here in SharpCharts. Now that we've taken a look at SharpCharts, let's jump over to ACP and see how things look in that advanced charting platform. All right, everyone, so here we are in ACP, of course, our advanced charting platform. Things are similar from an annotation perspective here in ACP, but a little bit different. You do actually have a lot more options, a little bit more control, and there are some handy little tips and tricks, things that I also want to highlight here in ACP. So to access the annotation tools from our advanced charting platform, look for that annotation icon, the little pencil and ruler, give that a click, and that's going to open up the sidebar. So the first thing that I want to highlight is that you actually have 2 ways to position the annotations panel, the annotation tools in ACP. Now, when we first brought out the platform, this was what we did. We put all of the annotation tools into one of these panels, similar to the chart settings and your chart styles, all of the other kind of tools that you have access to in ACP, including layouts, multi-chart layouts, one of my favorite features of ACP. So we do have annotations built into one of these panels that slides out from the left. Now this gives you a lot of sort of access, a lot of space to work and read things. You can scroll through that list of annotations, and when we actually jump in and edit one, it's really, really easy because you've got a lot of space to see all of the different controls there. The downside, though, of this view, some people like it, some people don't. The downside is that it does steal some charting screen real estate from you. You can see that as I open this up and close this down, that chart does move around on me. It gets a little bit smaller. So what we've recently brought out is actually the ability to detach this annotations panel from the left side of the screen and position it as kind of a floating widget that's not going to steal any screen real estate from you. I personally have been using this more and more. I love it. I think it is very, very cool, very, very handy. And the great thing too is you can actually kind of leave it open, position it off the screen, and have access to it when you want it. So let's take a look at that right now. To detach the annotations panel here in ACP, look for that little box with the arrow coming out of it. That arrow is kind of breaking out of that box. So when you give that a click, you'll see that that annotations panel now detaches into its own sort of floating widget. Same set of tools, same set of menus, same set of buttons, but it's detached into this floating widget. Now, the really cool thing is that you can sort of drag this to wherever you want. You can position it even off the screen a little bit. So as I mentioned, I like to actually kind of leave this open when I'm charting in ACP. I'll drag it down to the bottom of the screen, and as you can see, the only thing that remains is that little legend, that little title that says Annotations. When I'm ready for it, I can just drag that right back up and access any of the tools that I want. The other thing that I will do occasionally is open up one of these other sidebars on the right side of the screen. Maybe I'll open up the symbol summary, for instance, and I'll actually sort of put the annotations panel on top of that other panel that I'm looking at, and then I can still access the data in that right-hand panel, and I've got my annotations panel, so I can sort of stack things on top of each other. So a couple of different views that you can use there, but having this annotations panel in its own kind of floating widget, I find is very, very helpful. Now this is going to remember what you last used, so if you like to use the annotations panel undocked or sort of in that floating mode, it is going to remember it the next time that you come to ACP. Of course, if you want to get it back, you just hit that same icon, the little arrow kind of reverses, but it's really easy to dock and undock that annotations panel here in ACP. So we're going to leave it docked on the side just so that we have a little bit more room to kind of see everything. But let's walk through another couple of tips and tricks, a little bit of a tour here in ACP. Of course, like we said, you've got all of your different annotations here, and instead of having little icons that you have to kind of figure out what they are, you've actually just got those names. So things like trend line, extended trend line, infinite trend line, that's going to go in both directions. You've got a few more options actually for some of these tools here in ACP, things that we're going to be bringing out in SharpCharts at some point as well. You've also got all of your shape tools, text tools, you've got line studies down here at the bottom. That's where you can find things like your Fibonacci retracements. So all of those tools are right there for you right in this panel. Now, before we jump in and actually look at one, I do want to point out the buttons down at the bottom of this kind of main view of the annotations panel. So of course, you've got your undo button, you've got your clear all button. If you got a ton of annotations on a chart and you want to wipe them all off the thing really, really quickly, you can do that with that big red button. And just like we had in SharpCharts, you've got that quick tips button. So this is another one that I want you to spend a little bit of time with. Get to know some of these shortcuts, some of these hotkeys. And again, you've got tool-specific hotkeys in addition to kind of those global ones. So same thing, things like Command D, you can duplicate things on the fly. If you have an annotation selected, you can delete that really quickly. Command Z to undo. All of those same hotkeys apply here in ACP. Now with the trend line and all of these other tool-specific hotkeys as well, you've got that list to read through. But if you're using any of these, again, you've got lots and lots of little hotkeys that you can use to do specific actions like locking things into a 90-degree angle, adding additional Fibonacci lines, toggling values is a big one here in ACP. So if you're using something like our percent change tool, you can actually toggle the values on and off using shift click. But as you're going to see in the annotations panel itself, we've actually built in menus for a lot of this stuff as well. So we'll take a look at that in just a second, but I did want to draw your attention over to this quick tips pop-up that lets you study a couple of those quick tips that you do have access to. Now, we've got our save button down at the bottom. So whenever you're done annotating a chart and you want to actually save that to a chart list in your account, you've got that save annotations button down at the bottom, big green one. And the one that I glossed over is one of the coolest ones here in ACP. This is the snap to price function. You can see when I hover over that, it's going to say snap to price. What this is going to do is turn on a little kind of magnetic functionality to your annotations. So if we jump in here to something like a trend line, you can see that when I hover over this chart, I've got that little blue dot that's going to float around the screen. This is going to snap to specific points on this chart. It's going to intelligently find different values of moving averages, price bars, candlesticks, high, low, open, close, volume bars, any moving averages that you have. It's going to intelligently jump to the indicator or overlay values that are on the screen. A very, very handy tool. Again, if you want to be very specific with your annotations, you don't want to just kind of draw something in space. You want to make sure that you're hitting those highs, hitting those lows, hitting those opens or those closes, or drawing something exactly across a moving average. You can use that snap to price function to actually do that. So the cool thing too is, let's see if we can find a bar that's a little bit bigger, especially on a bar like this one here. If we find a bar that's actually got some pretty wide spreads between high, open, low, and close, you can see that this will actually jump to specific parts of the candle. As I move around there, it's a little bit small, but it'll actually jump to all of those different specific parts of a candle. You can kind of see it on this one here. It'll jump from the open open, to the high, to the low, to the close, all those different parts of that candle or of a bar if you're using bar charts. That snap to price function will actually let you pinpoint across any of those. So very, very cool. Now, like I mentioned, we've got a lot of these settings instead of hotkeys. A lot of those settings that you can use a hotkey for are actually built into these tools directly. So a couple ones that I wanted to highlight here in the trendline tools, for instance, you can use that sort of hotkey to lock your lines horizontally. We can see if we do, let's say, a purple line. We'll get back to my purple line. We'll make it nice and thick so that we can see it too. If we draw that across, you can see that I can use that hotkey to actually lock that thing perfectly horizontally. But in the case of ACP, we also have some menus that let me do that too. So I can actually turn on lock horizontally for this line. And now I'm not having to worry about a hotkey. I can just draw that line right across. So in ACP, when you open up these different annotation tools, pay close attention to the different sort of options that you have on that chart. There's a lot of really, really cool functionality that you can actually take advantage of just with these little settings. You can also do things, for instance, like Fibonacci retracement. In this case, you can actually turn on and off any of the fib levels that you want. You don't have to worry about us kind of doing things automatically for you. We give you complete control over all of those Fibonacci levels that you want. You can also do things like fill color really, really easily. So if we wanted to change this to be a purple fill, here we can see our fib levels on this chart. Not actually going to draw them intentionally, but we can see that Fibonacci tool with those values. And again, you've got other options here like displaying all of the values or just displaying the price levels. So a lot of really, really cool controls that you have here in ACP. Also things like line style, line thickness, of course, all of those available as well. So ACP gives you a lot of control, similar to SharpCharts, still has some of those hotkeys, but in this case, since we do have a lot more space to work with this little panel, we do have a lot of those menus built in. Now, if we highlight something and delete it off the chart, let's say we pop this out and let's add an extended trend line. That's one that I use quite a lot. You can see that if we undock that annotations panel, we're still gonna have access to all of those same controls. So this is why I like to use this thing undocked. It gives me a little bit more space to work with my charts. But again, you can take advantage of all of those different tools, all of those different features in that little kind of mini annotations panel right there. So that's our show for today. Hopefully you've had a sense of kind of what these annotation tools can do. If you've seen some of these things in action, maybe you've been using them for a long time, hopefully this is still giving you some ideas for ways to get more out of these tools. I'm always shocked when I show people how to lock those trend lines horizontally. That is a big one for me. And every time I show it to people, they go, oh my gosh, game changer. I love it. So now you've seen how you can do that in SharpCharts and ACP. Of course, we took a look at a ton more, some of those other hotkeys for saving, undoing, deleting, duplicating, all of those things in SharpCharts and in ACP. Great ways to get more out of these annotation tools and really kind of streamline that process. Once you learn a couple of those and you start to get the hang of it, it's a very quick process annotating these charts. You can move things around, duplicate, save, undo, all of that stuff right there. No need to click those buttons, just use those hotkeys. So hopefully you've had some fun with me digging through some of these annotation tools today. I want to thank you again for joining me on the show. Remember, we do this every Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern time, up on the live channel, also on YouTube and our on-demand platform, StockChartsTV.com as well. Again, my name is Grayson Roze, Vice President of Operations here at StockCharts. Looking forward to being back with you soon for some of those new release, new features, also those technology previews. So stay tuned. We got a lot coming up in the next couple of weeks. We're going to highlight it all right here on this show. So lots more coming to you. Very exciting stuff. But until then, chart on, my friends.